Since its foundation in 1913, Valzug has been committed to building a sustainable future through the manufacturing of long-lasting kitchen and textile care appliances and responsible carbon-neutral production. It means the Swiss firm is well placed to tackle the topic of timelessness in design. And that's exactly what it will do across 3 special episodes of Monocle on Design. The second episode airs on Wednesday 29th of May. We'll hear from designers including Andrea Caputo, Philippe Malouin and Sabine Marcelis.
I think it's about getting input from a diverse source, and then hopefully the outcome is then something surprising and unexpected and not like what a lot of other people are doing.
So tune in for some essential discussion on ensuring quality and longevity are imbued in our homes and workplace with Valzug.
This is Monocle on Design, a show where we discuss everything from architecture and craft to furniture and fashion. I'm Nick Manise. On today's program, we preview some of the stories hitting the newsstand in Monocle's June issue. Across the next 30 minutes, we'll unpack the design of a cinema in Switzerland and hear about Bang & Olufsen's work reviving some of its classic pieces of design. Plus, we hear from the likes of Samuel Ross and Sabine Marcelis. All that coming up on Monocle on Design. Hello and welcome to today's show. Nick Manise here, joined in the studio by Monocle's Associate Editor, Grace Charlton. We're gearing up for summer across the Northern Hemisphere, which is sort of what I hope we've captured in these pages of Monocle's June issue, which is on newsstands now. We've got a big interview series which includes your chat with Ursilia Valdo, an astrophysicist that worked with the lighting brand Artemide, which we did profile on this program, but you can now read it in print. What jumped out at you about your chat with her?
I just loved hearing from someone, no offense, who wasn't a designer. I speak to so many designers and I do love them all, but it was really nice to have like a different discipline bring their own lens and knowledge to a lamp. So I found my chat with her just completely enlightening and mind-expanding in the best way.
We were at Salone where we recorded this series of big interviews. And, you know, it's funny that you talk there about people from outside of design coming into design. And that's something that Samuel Ross, who I spoke to for the series, sort of does. He's an artist and a designer. I feel like there was a period where everyone seemed to be this hybrid profession. Do you know what I mean?
The slashies.
The slashies. But he's quite keen to not be a slashie and just to have two, I guess, distinct practices. He's a British Caribbean artist and designer and has collaborated with brands like Nike and Apple and showed work at galleries like White Cube in London. He's also got an MBE for services to fashion and all this while running his own studio, SRA. So I had a little bit of a chat to him during Milan Design Week. I began our chat by asking Samuel how he sees the relationship between his role as both an artist and designer.
You know, the past few years it was more so the title of multidisciplinary designer, and at the moment it seems to be multi-hyphenate, which is kind of being flung around quite a bit. But I honestly believe that, you know, when one decides to kind of dedicate yourself to the creative arts, you need to have these different levers, right? For the most part, some of those are commercial levers, which tend to fall under the remit of service design and commercial work. And on the other side, it's more so just this innate desire to be able to contribute into the, you know, future index of the history of the arts. And I kind of look at it more so as church and state, where with the arts it's a complete expression of self, and when it comes to design it's really the gift of servitude.
That's quite fascinating. So you're quite clear on there are distinct boundaries, and it really comes down to who you're working for.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, a good example of that would be the partnerships with, say, LVMH, Acqua di Parma or Hublot, where you can see that there is a fractal of the language that I've developed in my fine art practice, which is almost amplified for a slightly more easier, palatable gesture, you could say, to the audience.
Which is where that service element comes in, because it's no longer about you. It's certainly inspired by you, but it's really ultimately about other people.
It's about reach. It's about, you know, finding ways to simply have like a micro or macro moment of elation with an audience base and to hopefully bring up some questions. When you have like a relatively strong design language, you could say, whether it's color or shape or texture or material, there's always this line you have to toe of ensuring that there's enough newness as you work in the commercial sector and spaces cross-category without also diluting down the essence of what is fundamentally interesting about a practice. So by throwing these slightly more abstract partnerships into the mix, you continue to produce this counterweight of newness, I'd say, and there's also this idea of challenge, which is really interesting within design. If I think back to how, my first company at Cold Wall became closer to a technical sportswear brand, it was through an independent partnership that I took with Oakley in 2018. And that partnership was purely about learning how to work with technical materials and being able to open up new relationships with milliners and vendors such as Lamintas or Omlatex or Mayoki or Komatsu in Tokyo. And there was this learning which then, trickled back into a Cold Wall, and then we have a Cold Wall as a technical luxury sportswear brand. It's quite similar when it comes to the tertiary elements of engineering, you could say, hence why the partnership with Codership is also an onboarding of skills for our small studio.
I mean, I want to ask you, talk about design being about service and being about, I guess, ultimately there's a customer. When you're going from that big picture back down to this small scale and you're thinking about the person that's ultimately using the product.
There's almost this unspoken obligation, or maybe it's more so like a personal expectation, that you are almost trying to etch new ground. So service isn't forgotten in any of the decisions that you make, but at the end of the day, a well-versed, nuanced audience or member of the design community who has the means to afford these type of products, they're looking for something which is going to solicit or hold emotion or solicit a response of sorts. And I guess my obligation as an artist and a designer is to also put new concepts out which are maybe slightly more absurd or abstract and carry a level of risk. I also feel like I have this personal obligation to do so. It would feel like a waste of an opportunity to work with these market leaders and not try to push, antagonize and pull movements and concepts apart through the commercial practice as well as the artistic practice. As you were saying earlier, the artistic practice is a relatively safe space, but in design you have to engage in servitude and questioning and inquiry, and it's less about the idea of good and bad, and it's more so the idea of pulling apart what we know in the hopes of being able to move forward into a new design moment in time, you could say.
I mean, and tell us about like the individual body. I know this is something we talked about briefly off air. It's like, how does that also come through?
I'm obsessed with like serving the body. Whether that's my sculptural works in White Cube and Freeman Bender have in terms of being related to the canon of mid-century British sculptors, whether it's a Moore or a Caro or a Hepworth, or whether it's more contemporary relationships between industrial process and architecture in the YBA movement, such as Rachel Whitread. There's a lexicon that I kind of belong to as a British artist and designer, and I'm very keen to make sure that there are relationships and reports that are visible within that work, so it's not lost. And then there's this other notion of public space and the affordability of design feeling as though it can become public and democratic. And at times it's more so just inviting people to have a conversation around a particular category and object.
Are you finding inspiration in just talking to people about the objects they surround themselves with? Is it talking to brands about their concerns? What discussions are you having that's then informing your work?
I think there's almost this unspoken expectation in some of the partnerships and work that comes from the studio that there is going to be this line between abstraction, experimental, slightly radical, a little bit off-piece and esoteric. So there's already these pillar stones to more so oscillate off when we are engaging with commercial partners. There's also trust they often give to us. We've been fortunate to have at least a high amount of feedback from audiences and consumers historically, which does develop a bit of a confidence within the studio and more so this cadence between the architects who work with SRA, lawyers who work with SRA, and the industrial designers and graphic designers as well.
I mean, let's talk a little bit about SRA and the studio. What's the scope of your work?
Sure, I think the main top line view we have is the beautification of industrial processes in industrial design. And really at the moment there's more so a focus on hard luxury goods for the most part. That doesn't mean that we don't spend as much time working with, say, Generation Press, who of course are an incredible lithographic printer in the UK, Paul Hewitt, who we've produced a lot of material with, which is on a much smaller scale. It's this idea that luxury and price don't necessarily need to live in the same space or room. It's more so a sensibility and a cadence. The main focus of the studio at this point is, of course, to be a service-based design studio. Over the next year, really, you will start to see there be a shift into a D2C model from the studio becoming much more of a atelier and a brand. And another reason I really wanted to start the studio now 4 years ago, which we started at the Serpentine Hublot Design Prize, was to make sure that there is a relationship and a rapport between local independent manufacturing within the UK, but also global vendors, to more so compete against this idea of synthetic work processes that, of course, are a necessity for PLCs and for entities of scale. But when you're really thinking about the value being about craft and sensibility and sensuality and slightly more esoteric prospects, it's about the intimacy of the relationships held with vendors and producers and artisans and craftspeople.
It's not just about the actual product at the end, it's about the process. So is having the right makers involved key? Tell us a little bit about how you're redesigning that.
This notion, and I guess that's what I was trying to get at with the focus on, say, working with and having brilliant architects who all come from AA school or RCA for the most part into the SRA studio, but then also having these deeply close relationships with UK print producers and makers. It's about the articulation and sensitivity in each of these disciplines. SRA isn't a catch-all. As I said, I'm an artist and a designer, so we don't try to do all by our hand, but we do try to work with the best in field for the most part, who understand the cadences of their fields. There's also this matter of trying to rightly balance expression through aesthetics, but also open up new means of manufacturing.
And we've touched on it a little bit, but your priorities as a designer and artist over the next 12 months, where's your energy being focused? What are some of the concerns you're looking to address?
I am really focused on, I think, housing the body remains an absolute focus, whether that's through garment or whether that's through public space, whether that's through apparel and footwear. There's a real focus on being able to democratize the idea of sensibility and the idea of taste. And I think that will become a little bit more clear over the next 12 months. I'm also absolutely focused. One of the real mission statements of SRA is to make sure that, to be honest, British design and artists stay on the forefront of global conversations. Hence why it's a real focus for us to have at least 1 to 2 global collaborations in Asia Pacific and North America at all times annually, to make sure that we do stay part of the wider conversation. And the third component I'd say I'm interested in, I'm still deeply inspired by the power of design in public space and the questioning that can come about. My father's a stained glass artisan who studied at CSM and did his MA in glass technology in Leicester, and he spends a lot of time procuring stained glass windows for old cathedrals and churches globally. But I remember the first time that he took me to see the Henry Moore sculpture in Kensington Gardens as a child, and all these questions came to mind, such as who, what, when, why, how. And it stuck with me, and I want to be able to deliver that type of experience for others, to be able to look at things in a slightly more esoteric way if they maybe haven't had the opportunity to go through the schooling and whatnot. So that is also a very nice segue into the Black British Artist Grants Programme, which will continue to provide British artists with funding independently on behalf of SRA annually. And we've just added in the King's Foundation this year, the Royal College of Art, and Serpentine will likely be also joining this year.
The artist and designer Samuel Ross there. Now, Grace, okay, so we've covered the big interview you did in the June issue, but off the back of that, so we surveyed, I guess, some big names and big brands like Artemide, like Samuel Ross, but we also looked at some emerging talents that you spotted at Salone Satellite. I mean, tell us about some of your picks. Who did you earmark as people you want to keep an eye on?
Salone Satellite, which is the part of the fair dedicated to designers under the age of 35, is always a highlight. I just love seeing what everyone from around the world is working on and how they're innovating. 2 studios really stood out. There was Jos van Roosmalen. He's a Dutch industrial designer. He's based in Rotterdam and he focuses on lighting, electronics and furniture. And he just had this really cute little lamp called Ami. It's a little task light that almost looks like a person, but not in a naff way, like in a really cool, streamlined, designy way. I think there was a confident simplicity to his design, which really stood out to me. There was also a Japanese design studio called KT and FS. These 2 guys who find inspo in daily routines and habits. They had a collection there which was called Made in Habits, and it included a dining chair, a shelf, and a footrest that sort of aimed to provide an ergonomic experience. And to do that, they build the prototypes themselves and they test them. Again, really sort of quietly confident, straightforward, but just good design.
The fact that they're looking at how they move through their daily lives and observing what might be missing. And that's how they're, I guess, designing their collection. That really is about experiencing it yourself and then making it. You had some other things in there. I know you were in Denmark. Tell us what you were doing with Bang & Olufsen there.
I know, for the first time I went to Denmark, and it wasn't to Copenhagen. I went to Jutland, which is sort of this northern province of Denmark. That's where Bang & Olufsen are based. They've always had their factories there. They're doing this recreated classics program. They bring back these old products and then refurb them to be new, time-bending almost. But they're re-releasing the BO Sound 9000, which is this really iconic CD player. It was designed by David Lewis, end of 1995. It's very sleek and futuristic. It's got loads of aluminium and glass. You can fit 6 CDs. The mechanism can jump between the CDs. So it's a playlist before Spotify was ever a thing.
It did revolutionise the way people were listening to music. I guess my question is, why bring it back? Why is this a priority for Bang & Olufsen?
The issue of obsolescence in technology design is a huge problem. The UN estimates that about 8 kilos of electronic waste are produced per person per year. So that means 61.3 million tons of discarded computers, phones, cables, batteries, TVs, etc. being disposed of every year.
What jumped out to me about this from your reporting was it's the same thing we harp on over and over again here, but I think we do it because projects like this show that it matters. If you make something quality, you are going to want to take care of it. Or as it starts to wear down, there's going to be that incentive to refinish things, to fix things, to quite literally polish them back up again. I think that's the beauty of Bang & Olufsen's work. That's why they're such a standout Danish design brand. And the key thing being design, because it is well considered. It has all these traits and characteristics that you would want, that would then in turn make you want to take care of it. Grace Charlton, thank you for joining us in the studio. We'll be right back after this.
The Menu, bringing you Monocle's recipe for the best in drinking and dining. We make entertaining a doddle.
It's incredibly easy to make.
With expert opinions.
You can use fish fillets, which you grill in the oven or pan fry.
A bit of seasoning.
Lots of lime, a lot of cracked pepper, and a bit of good olive oil.
And plenty of spice.
And then you cook it in caraway and 7 spice.
As well as something sweet.
Then you take a big pot of mascarpone and spoon it into your egg yolk.
And maybe even a little bit nuts.
You take it out, you top it with some pine nuts, and you're good to go.
It's a recipe that's guaranteed to impress.
It's slightly controversial, but it's the one thing that has surprised the most people when they eat it.
Premiering live every Friday at 2000 London time, midday in Los Angeles, or downloadable wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to this special edition of Monocle on Design, which is dedicated to our June issue of Monocle magazine. Next up is a conversation I had with Sabine Marcelis, who is a Dutch designer that works across scales and media. She's created everything from civic installations in London to furniture for the Danish brand Hem. Again, features in our big interview series. I spoke to her whilst I was in Milan as well about a project she worked on as part of her role on the selection committee of Design Space Alula's first residency program. Now, this program invites both Saudi and international creatives to make new pieces inspired by the ancient Saudi Arabian city's architecture and landscape. So she presented this work that she, I guess, helped curate at Salone at an installation she designed with her partner, Paul Cornet, the founder of Rotterdam-based architectural practice Cloud. Let's hear from Sabine now.
I'm really interested in how you can change your perception of space, site specifically. I have a few projects coming up that take that to sort of a new level that I haven't worked on before, which is the kinetic level, making pieces that are actually moving. It's been a challenge, engineering, but I'm really excited to show that in the coming months. I think because my practice is kind of moving outdoors a lot recently, I want to get the most out of materials that I have been working with already for a long time. Light comes into play, obviously, again, but then trying to also use the power of sunlight to add more to projects. Infusing solar cells into my projects that are in the glass, invisible, so that you're actually also generating electricity or making installations that have artificial light that is off the grid. That kind of material science is really exciting for me.
For designers beyond your studio, beyond your practice, what's the benefit of somebody like you working on that? Are there wider potentials for this? Are we going to see glass with solar panels embedded in it in future?
For sure. I mean, I'm definitely not the only one working on that, but I think any projects that come out and see the light of day are an inspiration. It showcases a possibility also to the developers or anyone working in public space that installations don't need to be passive. They can also be generating something.
What's your hope with this? Is it to change people's minds? Is it to just make a beautiful spaces, beautiful objects? What's your ambition with
the greater plan?
Yeah, I'm obsessed with that because I think it's nice. Somebody like yourself with profile, it's like people are going to look to you. Do you feel a responsibility to like chart some sort of agenda or course?
Yeah, of course. Any designer, it doesn't matter where you are in your career, you'll always have a whole responsibility to be conscious of how you create the pieces that you're creating. For me, it's also really nice to bring things to a wider audience because quite often my pieces kind of go to homes and, only the visitors to those homes can see it. And I think with outdoor installations, anyone can come and see it. The function of my work is also to create some curiosity or awe, and it's really nice to be able to bring that to then a bigger audience.
What are the discussions that happen in your studio around forthcoming projects? Are you talking about, that ambition, we want to reach people, we want to talk to people, we want to inspire dialogue? Is that something you're actively talking about, or is that something that you see more as a byproduct afterwards?
Actually, when we first met, the show at London Design Festival, that was kind of the first time where I brought pieces outside that had a direct interaction with the public, and people were really like using those swivel chairs, and it's really like rewarding as a designer to see that. I wanted to do a bit more of that. It doesn't mean I'm like completely shying away from collectible design.
I guess just finally, priorities for your studio. You said searching for more outdoor projects. Is there more material innovation? What's the plan moving forward?
A bigger outdoor installation that we're working on at the moment is for SeaTac, the Seattle airport, which spans many square meters and has been, again, very challenging. Working in the States also is quite challenging. I'm always trying to challenge myself and my team, the materials, and there's loads coming up.
You've got a bit of a platform here on Monocle Radio. What would be a message you want to get out to the design community? I mean, you've been surrounded by people in Milan. What's something that you hope you see more people adopt or more people do or more people consider?
There's so much material science going on and a lot of like really great new materials that are extremely sustainable, and that's really exciting to be able to design with those because past generations have not had any access to that new material science. So I hope that people really adopt that and think carefully about how production is linked to designs as well. I do notice there's a tendency to create images. Oh, here's a design that I've thought of, and then it is completely removed from how it can be produced. I think it's really important to stay super close to the production process so that there is a reason why things are designed the way they are within a material or production.
So it would be, the thing is to get into the workshops, get into the factories, get into the studios and work closely with the people actually making these things.
Yeah. And then again, wherever you are, like locally.
Because is that also just a kind of a nice way to avoid where everything kind of starts to look the same? Like if you're working with, as you said, local materials, but also local makers, maybe there's an added authenticity and a sense of place that starts to come into these pieces. In a world where we're mass producing everything, that's kind of like the breath of fresh air that perhaps we need. But is there something too as well, like to unearthing maybe skill sets and unearthing skill sets that maybe weren't widely known and there's a knowledge hidden in a place? Is that something that's happened?
Yeah, absolutely. And I even think also a lack of access to not materials, but machines, where you're actually forced to then think a little bit more primitively about a production process. That can open up a lot of opportunities and ideas as well. I think whatever the situation, there is an opportunity there to make something unique out of it. I always think back of when I went to high school. I wore a school uniform. Everyone looks exactly the same. We were the most creative at still expressing our own individuality through how you could tweak the school uniform slightly, or how you can get away with hinting some jewelry somewhere or a different haircut just to differentiate yourself. And I think, indeed, if everything's available to you, then that challenge isn't there.
My thanks to Sabine Marcelis. You can, I guess, read more about her in Monocle's June issue, which is on all good newsstands now. Next up, I'd like to welcome another member of the Monocle team into the studio. It's our researcher, Claudia Jacob.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you were very busy for Monocle's June issue, out and about reporting, but one of those reports did land in the design section. You visited Lausanne's Capital Cinema. Tell me a little bit about this.
It's the biggest remaining, I should say, cinema in Switzerland, which, considering that it's in Lausanne, it's Switzerland's fourth city. It's been revived basically thanks to one lady called Lucienne Schnegg, who fought for the survival of this historic cinema. She was just a really ardent cinephile from the Jura region. She really loved cinema. She was hired as the cinema's secretary in 1949, and just 7 years later she became the manager. But she made sure that she wasn't just managing the cinema, but she was selling ice cream, she was a cashier, she was ushering people into the cinema. So she was really involved. She really celebrated the art form, and it's thanks to her really that this architecture firm has renovated the entire space, brought back some of the 1920s and 1950s features, and when you walk in you can really just sense this amazing opulence of cinema, velvet and the aluminium walls and the sort of yellow colours that really bring the whole thing to life. And it's really a reminder of how important cinema used to be. I mean, we forget about now, we all have on demand, we don't need it anymore, but Lucienne really wanted to preserve that and bring people back to the space to watch film in a form that was purely for entertainment.
I know you met the architects there that worked on this project. I mean, are there any particular materials or approaches that were essential to designing a cinema, to pulling us out of our homes and away from our Netflix and chilling?
For sure. I mean, velvet, as I mentioned, was a key component. What I found really interesting is she said that the velvet was actually the only material that they left intact while they did the whole renovation, which is pretty crazy because they completely gutted the entire room. But they kind of brought in these velvet restorers who essentially kept the humidity of the room at the right temperature so that they could build around the velvet, and they left it all intact because she explained to me that if you take velvet off the walls and then put it back on, when you come to open the building again, the velvet won't retain the same texture. So they actually left the velvet on throughout the whole renovation. And the other really interesting thing she said is that the chandeliers, which are these sort of beautiful 1950s pieces made from Murano glass, they painstakingly took them off the ceilings and cleaned all of the nicotine stains out of it, because this was a time when you could smoke inside. That sort of ruined the shine of the glass. So they took all of them off, reconditioned them, and they've recreated this really sumptuous foyer that Lucienne Schnegg would have remembered from her time. And they've also added an additional subterranean screen downstairs, which I thought was interesting because this is a much smaller cinema room. The main auditorium holds over 700 people. This one holds 400. And so it gives them the opportunity to decide, is this a film that's going to attract larger numbers of people? If so, we can put it in the auditorium. Or if it's going to be a film from an emerging filmmaker, we can keep them downstairs and manage the numbers a bit better. They're realistic about the fact that we don't go to the cinema as much as we used to, and maybe that's something that we need to acknowledge if we're going to preserve this building in the long term.
That's kind of an amazing, awareness. So they're a Montreux-based practice called Architectum, and you spoke to Marion Zand there. But it shows, I guess, an awareness from Architectum to consider programming. It's not just about putting back what was there, but really consider, I guess, how we need to reprogram spaces with the way our behaviour is these days and what people might want from a space. For me, that shows that the architect's job is about so much more than just delivering, but it's also about considering use. It's about building in some flexibility. And I think that's one of the key things that seems to come up. We talk so much about designing for longevity and sustainability. And one of those things is having flexibility built into the space. And that means flexibility for potential use changes, but also flexibility for an ability to accommodate a range of different people and a range of different uses.
you know, this is a massive screen. It really brings the whole film alive. It's a massive auditorium, and you share that experience with so many people. And I spoke to the representative of the Cinémathèque Suisse, which is basically the Switzerland's National Film Archives, who are managing this venture. And he said to me, we really hope that Lucienne Schnegg would be proud of the job we've done. I really felt like they were doing this for her, even though sadly she actually never got to see the finished product. And I think that really encapsulates the celebratory experience that Lucienne Schnegg always saw cinema as.
That sounds perfect. My thanks to Claudia Jacob there. And that's all for today's show. For more design stories, listen to our 5-minute midweek bonus show, Monocle on Design Extra, which airs on Thursdays. And if you enjoy print, then do pick up a copy of Monocle magazine as well. It's on all good newsstands now. Today's episode was produced and edited by Maylee Evans. I'm Nick Manise, and you can reach me on nm@monocle.com. Thanks for listening.